Hi, everybody. Welcome to another inspirational interview here on Artful Minds. I'm Michael King, your host. It's the 17th of September, 2024, and our interview tonight is with Ingrid Christensen. In addition, if you're interested in monthly critiques and a way to improve your artwork, check out artfulminds.ca. Ingrid is a self-taught painter whose work centers on capturing the essence of light. She explores how light can transform even the most ordinary objects into luminous subjects, focusing on still life and figurative genres. She paints from life, but understands that all paintings are ultimately shaped by memory. As flowers fade and models leave, what remains is the artist's distilled impression of the scene. If she can capture the essence on canvas, she considers the painting a success. You can find her at ingridchristensen.com, or on Instagram, you can look for her at Ingrid Christensen Artist, and I'll throw that in the chat. Welcome, Ingrid. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks, Michael. Nice to be here.
I just want to share my screen, and as I do so, I'm going to go through about, a dozen to 20 paintings. I want you to briefly talk about your artistic journey.
Can't wait to see what you show. Okay, we haven't gone that far back. I'm just worried that you're going to go back to like a decade ago, which would be sort of, no, don't show those. So like you said, I am self-taught. I started about 20 years ago with watercolor, thinking really stupidly that watercolor was the easiest one to start with because you can thin it with water. How hard can it be? And, all those years of tempera paint as a kid in elementary school, I quickly realized that while it's not easy, it is absolutely gorgeous. And it says exactly what I want it to say about color and light. Then I tried acrylics because the market for works framed under glass was pretty small. People wanted bigger, brighter paintings that didn't need framing. And I tried acrylics. I did not have much success with those. They always looked like I was using house paint. It was just so miserable. And then I took a chance on oil paints. I had the same preconception that so many people have, which is that, oh no, I don't want to use those because they're toxic. And a friend who was a scientist said, no, they're not the toxic part. Yes, pigments are toxic across all mediums, but the toxic part is the solvents. And so I did some research and discovered she was right, and have since painted in oils. And as you can tell, toxicity mattered to me right from the start. Because at the time I was painting in my house. I've got a studio now, but I was painting in my house. And I have maintained that focus on toxicity, on health hazards of what we're doing for the last 20 years, because I intend to do this thing till I'm 99. I want a paintbrush in my hand until then. So I'm really concerned about the materials that I use. I'm well aware that I'm dabbling with chemistry every time I'm in the studio. That doesn't really answer the art journey, but anyway, that's when I started, and that's how I progressed. And I was talking to some friends about old paintings, because a friend of mine was going through and culling boxes of old paintings and saying, oh, they're so bad. And I said, yes, mine are so bad too, from way back. But interestingly, what I started out painting is what I'm still painting. I can just do it better now than I could do it then. So painting, as you said, memory. I don't consider myself a sentimental person, and yet what I paint is pure nostalgia for the most part. That's what draws me. I put a painting behind the little boy with his hands like this, and that's my son, 10 years ago in California. I love those things. I see a picture like that from the old photo albums and they resonate. It's like, well, I want to paint that. Generic child on the beach doesn't interest me, but my kid on the beach, that really sparks an interest.
That's interesting. It's funny how many people start off with watercolor because it's kind of what they learned in primary school, and I think it's easy, just add water. And you're right, it's one of the hardest mediums out there, and one that I stay away from because I want to feel good about my paintings. Gouache, on the other hand, I love it. It's just that transparency in that watercolor. Now, how fast it dries substantially later, like the value shift is just gigantic, right?
It is. When I started with watercolors, I was looking at people like Mel Stabin, Charles Reed, Joseph Zerbukovic, people who use it in a really loose and apparently casual manner. Not the least bit casual, I know, but they make it look casual. And they just kind of feed colors into the puddle and then stand back and let it do its thing. They're not, rendering petal by petal on flowers. They're going smash a pink, drizzle in some green over here, drizzle in some purple over there, and we'll see what happens. And then we'll carve into it. And that was what really drew my eye. And I think that helped me to move on to looking for similarities, because I think it's the most beautiful medium. Watercolor is the most beautiful. And I was always trying to find that luminosity elsewhere. And I didn't find it in acrylics. I did find it eventually in some oil painters who were doing the same sort of thing. But I remember reading somewhere that what a watercolorist can do in 2 minutes, an oil painter will do in like 5 hours. And it's very true, because, they just go drizzle, 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 stand back, it does its thing. An oil painter, you've got to go first layer, and then carefully stroke on second layer, and then let it dry, and then come in and glaze, and then do that. But you can still get the glow.
Yeah. Well, if you want to get into the whole glazing aspect of it, I just don't have the patience for that.
Yeah, to be honest, nor do I, but I do tend to do a lot of scumbling.
Yeah, and we'll get to that because we'll talk about it now. In one of your previous interviews that I listened to, you always thought, or you did a lot of alla prima.
Yeah.
And you got, and so did I, not to compare myself to you, but I can relate to exactly what you're saying, because you think, okay, I have this chance to make this painting great, and you work on it and you feel good about it, and you leave the studio, but you come back, it's not as great as you remember it. But then you've moved on to more of you've said layering process, but it's not the fact that you're layering, it's the fact that you'll leave the painting, then you'll come back and you'll adjust it. Leave it, come back and adjust it until it's complete. And I think that way of thinking, it frees you up to be able to create each single time. And in the end, I think you get a better painting. Can you talk about that process for you?
Yeah, I love that process. And it took age to be able to do that, because it took the patience. And, my kids grew up and they left, and I had a lot more free time. My brain wasn't divided in so many directions. I could spend 6 or 7 hours every day in the studio. And I was looking at different artists at that point than when I started out. When I started out, I was looking at people online who, and in contemporary galleries, who were doing alla prima work. And they were always, written up in American Artist and Plein Air magazine and whatnot. And they would talk about that freshness, the transparent shadow. They'd put it in with transparent red iron oxide, and they'd leave it, and then they'd do these semi-opaque and then the opaque passages. And they had this real process, and they'd knock off a painting, largely plein air or, from a live model, and they'd knock off a nice looking painting in one session. And I really wasn't seeing painters that I liked who were clearly working on paintings for longer than that. But then I started seeing people like Alex Kanevsky, seeing his work in galleries, online in galleries. There was a way that his mark making looked that I couldn't figure out. Like, after a while, you've done enough alla prima and you go, yeah, I know how he did that. I know the first color, and I know the last color, and I know everything in between. And then you look at a Kanevsky and you go, I have no clue where you started and how you got there. And that mark, beats me. And he has on his website process shots. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I don't know if he calls them sequences or processes or whatever, but if you peruse his website, you'll find a few paintings where he has taken a picture after every working session. And then it doesn't mean like daily, it just means it's dry. You go back in, you do some more with it, and take a picture at the end of that day. And what I realized was this man was doing 20 or more layers on a painting and working for months on a painting. I was fortunate enough to get a grant to go and take just a weekend workshop with him in Philadelphia a number of years ago. And he really didn't show us how to paint, which is probably for the best, but he told us so much about what he considers a professional painter should be thinking about. And he did talk about his process to some extent. He said, I consider my painting finished when every square inch seems right, whether it's a blank wall behind the model or it's her face, or, like every square inch, I can't think of anything else to do with that. But I've explored every option to get to that point, So if you look at his processes, he will eradicate figures or, completely change the canvas. And I thought, I've been abandoning canvases way too early. I've been saying, well, the freshness is gone, so it's dead, I'll destroy that. And I realized when I read about him that paintings can really go on, and they don't have to look stiffer and stiffer and stiffer as they go on, which is what I had sort of thought was what would happen, but not at all. No, they can be loose and changeable.
Yeah, until you do it, you don't really realize how much can be done, right? Thinking about it fresh, always going
I
back.
always say this in my classes. I frequently say this quote that I read once about it in an interview with Rose Franson, the great American contemporary painter. She said she tells her students that if a painting is from A to Z and you always stop at D because you're worried about losing the freshness, she says, what if something amazing is going to happen at L, but you never go there? And she says, push a painting as far as you can push it. And at the very worst, you'll just learn how far you can push it before it's totally dead. But that's worth knowing as well.
Oh yeah, without a doubt, right? Side note, I really like following artists lately that have their masters in fine art, et cetera, et cetera.
Right?
There's Zoe Frank and there's another young lady named Hannah Steele, and they'll work in the painting just like that. They'll work it over and then they'll come back and it changes over. Like, if you're doing a tree, it looks like the tree has gone through at least 8 seasons before they finalize the painting. And I thought, wow, that's a whole different way of thinking, right? It's kind of like distinguishing an established artist and more of a professional artist in terms of their development.
I think it's when you start falling in love with process, you understand process better, and you start really enjoying just the act of applying paint and seeing what colors do next to each other, and like, oh, what does this brush do? And what if I scrape that? And then you get so enchanted with the process that product kind of falls out of your mind. And that is, I think, when people start slowing down and really working a painting instead of going, well, got to get this, painting a day, got to get this sucker done. Otherwise I won't have something to post on Instagram.
Yeah, absolutely. And you nailed it right on the head there. Painting, what you have to fall in love with the process and everything changes without a doubt.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
So I want to ask you as well is you use a lot of temperature shifting within the same value. Some people call it broken color. And I'm going to bring
Yes.
some of this up just so people can see it. So I assume this is one of your sons on the beach here.
It's a nephew.
Okay, there you go. There you go. But if I zoom in, and what we mean by
Yes.
temperature shifting in the same value, people might see a blue and a kind of a green. But really, what I see, and maybe what you see a blue, and then you see a warmer blue, and you see a cooler blue. You see a slightly warmer, lighter blue, but not as warm as the warm blue,
Right.
et cetera, right? And so, can you talk about why you do this and why you find it has an impact on your paintings?
I just can't help but do that, because if I put down a color, it's never everything that I have perceived in that setting. The world has so many colors, and I'm trying to capture that, because I walk around like many artists. I walk around going, oh wow, like look at the way the light's hitting that bark. It's amazing. And you can stare at it for 5 minutes and go, I'm seeing some ochre, but I'm also seeing some magenta. And you can get really trancy about the whole thing. And then when you paint that subject, if I just put down, the yellow ochre shading into burnt umber or something, call it a tree trunk, it seems like I'm just barely scratching the surface of what I perceived. And then I wonder why I'm doing it in the first place. Like, if I'm not communicating my view of the world, how I see the world, it feels pointless to be making those images, because I'm just cursorily dashing them off. They're like notes rather than essays. And I want a painting to be a representation of the things that I see when I look deeply at the world. So broken color helps me do that. The longer I look at something, the more colors I see in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I do really try to maintain a painting from life practice rather. That was from a photo, but I do so much from life that I can use what I can discern from life in the work that is done from photo references. And I don't live near the ocean. I live in a landlocked prairie city, so I don't have experience with the ocean and those sorts of things. I always feel like I'm kind of faking it right here. But I do know that if I put something, that is this mid-value kind of grade blue, and if I put it out in the sun and it's on an overcast day, I will start to see these kinds of colors, and I'll just check it out and see if that will be appropriate in something that I don't have much experience with. I'm very good at being able to guess what could be happening to skin, but things in the landscape, I'm not a landscape painter, so that's more of a challenge for me.
Good to know. There's something that challenges you.
Oh God, yes. Every day, all day.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's wonderful that you actually will either interpret these colors and how you'll think you'll see them based on your experience with life. But it's also about training the eye, right? I remember when I started painting, I could see a blue sky from dark blue to light blue. I didn't
Yeah.
see all the nuances of violet, of greens, et cetera, et cetera. And then it takes time to develop that eye, right?
Yeah, it really does. And
Yeah.
I've told this story many times to classes, but I was teaching in-person classes weekly here in Calgary. And I had one student who really was getting frustrated because she couldn't see what I was trying to, I had a live model and or I had still life set up. And I'd say, well, what color would you make that shadow? She'd say it's gray. And I'd say, but don't you see the kind of the lavender right here and the way it turns green down there? And she'd go, well, now that you say it, of course I see it. And she was angry because her
Mm.
eyes were not working on that level yet. They were
Yeah.
working down here. And then one day she came into class and her whole demeanor had shifted. She'd lifted and she said, I see color.
That's fantastic.
She says, I can't drive safely right now, but I see color.
It's funny how
So
you get introduced to it and then all of a sudden one day it just happens, right?
all of a sudden you realize that you've just been living on this really utilitarian plane. And there's actually all this stuff going on up here, and you haven't bothered to just stop and stare at that apple in the sun or that cheek in the
Yeah.
light. And when you do, you realize you could paint that apple in the sun for the next year and you
Yeah.
wouldn't get sick of it.
Absolutely, right?
Yeah,
Absolutely. Now we're going to carry on this whole idea about using the eyes and painting how we see, because again, in one of your past interviews, and I like to explain painting this way as well to everybody, especially when they paint from photos, that everything's in focus, right? Your eyes
right.
don't really see anything like that. Like, we look at each other, but everything in our peripheral is very soft. And I want to bring up another painting of yours to show the point that, let's say here, maybe the focal point, because it's so vibrant of a green, was her bathing suit. But
Right.
everything beyond that is very soft. I mean, even this water, sky reflecting water coming down her shoulder, it doesn't matter to us because it's kind of how we see, and everything's blurred beyond that, right? So can you talk about
Yes.
how you approach that a little more?
Well, I read once a student in a workshop told me about a book, and I should have written down the title. It's called Vision and Art, I believe, and it's written by a neurobiologist. She was raving about that in terms of if you hold your arm at full extension, there we go, full extension, and you look at your thumbnail, that's as much of the world that is in focus at any given time as you go through the world. And because our eyes are always moving, our heads are moving, our brain is putting together these little bits. As we turn our head, you're getting this sense that, oh yeah, I know exactly what's in this room and I'm seeing it all. But actually you're seeing little snapshots and your brain is pushing them all together and going, there's the room. But we've all seen those videos where the basketball players are playing and you watch the video of the game and the gorilla walks through and at the end they say, so did you see the gorilla? And you go, there was a gorilla, but a gorilla walked right through the middle. And it just reminds you that you actually don't understand what is around you at any given time. And that comes as well with focus. We only see such a little bit of the world in focus. If I'm talking to a person and looking at their face, only the one eye is in focus and the other one's a little bit out of focus and everything else gets progressively blurrier. When I found painters like John Singer Sargent and Sorolla, they seemed to be seeing the world in that way. They had a hierarchy of focus. I mean, Rembrandt had a hierarchy of
Mm.
focus. You look at his portraits and there will be one eye in focus and the other one is slightly out of focus, and it just, it gets softer as you move away from that area. So it just seems like that is the way that we see the world, and that makes sense to me to portray in my paintings. Whenever I have, and I do it all the time, inadvertently tightened up a lot of edges throughout the image, it feels like I'm just recreating a photograph where
Mm.
everything's in focus, and that feels really pointless.
Yeah.
So it's not showing the way that I see the world.
And if anybody out there gets a chance to see Rembrandt's self-portraits, especially if he's holding an easel and some brushes in his hands, you'll be amazed how little detail there is in that palette and those brushes. They're more like just scribbles on a canvas, but for some reason we think they're the palette and the brushes, but he
Yeah.
uses that exact, and that was the instant that blew my mind. he was the master of that, especially the self-portraits. They're just mind-boggling.
Exactly. And I think that's, as somebody who doesn't have regular access, I have to travel far to see good art, historical art. I wasn't aware of how loose the painters whose work I admired really was until I managed to go to like New York and go to the Metropolitan and go, oh, look at that, it falls apart. You walk up to a Sorolla, you walk up to a Sargent, and they just turn into this apparent chaos of marks. But as you back up to the proper viewing distance that these artists intended across a great big dramatic room, they turn into these figures and, oriental carpets and all this stuff. And it's interesting to see them at proper scale, not in a book, not on a computer screen, because then you realize these works are rough. They're not refined and crisp edged. They are vigorous and rough, and there's a sense of life in them because of that, because that boundary between that person's body and their environment has been invaded. They've shot the environment into the body and the body into the environment. That's how we see the world. I mean, Cézanne was always exploring that too, with the multiple little blue lines around his apples, because every time you blink or breathe or move your body a little bit in space, it's now got a different placement in the world. And so he's putting all these little blue lines going, oh no, it's here. And it's here. Because we never know exactly where one thing ends and another thing begins. And that's how I paint.
Yeah. And it's so liberating when you do realize that, right? It changes you as an artist, I think. I truly do.
I think it does. And then the hardest part is being true to that recognition and not kind of caving in going, well, people won't like that because it's not refined and crisp. And it, for the uneducated eye, the biggest compliment they can pay you is, that looks just like a photo. And you go, oh, that's terrible. I'm sorry. So you're fighting that kind of pressure from the buying world, or your perception that is the pressure coming from the buying world. And you're fighting the whole coloring book upbringing where you color within the lines, and trying to remind yourself that this is a totally valid way to portray the world that you see in that way.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Going back to color, how true, like you stage your still lives and maybe some of your photographs too, but how true are you to not the colors within the photos or in your still life, but how true are you to the color relationships that you initially start off with, or do they shift throughout the painting?
Well, I'm not a good inventor. I cannot invent. And so, if I set up, I've got some sunflowers set up and there's a sort of a low chroma purple drape behind them, I wouldn't change that purple drape to another color. I would physically go and move put another fabric there, but I wouldn't in my painting go, well, let's make it this.
Interesting.
I just cannot invent, because the more you look, the more you realize that the reason that drape looks that way is because the yellow is bouncing off of it, the ceiling is bouncing onto it, the drape on the other side, which is wine colored, is bouncing this way. And so just to arbitrarily say, I'm going to sub in a green drape for that purple drape, I would not understand all of the complexity of what that does to the way that the colors of the other objects bounce into it.
Gotcha.
So I'm really, really bad at inventing. I'm good at seeing.
Well, you got half the battle.
It's gotten me this far. It's okay.
Yeah.
So I'm very literal.
Okay, then how about the vision and intent of, say, the painting? Let's say you've set up a still life. You want it to be this orange. You think it's going to be the whole focal point. But after sitting down and playing with this painting, maybe you're coming back for the third day. All of a sudden, there's something about this other objects over here. And so do you sometimes just shift the entire focus over and rework the entire painting for this new focal point?
That's a little harder because, I spend hours actually constructing the scene for a more complex still life. Simple ones like a vase and some flowers. But even then, I'm orchestrating like that piece behind me, that piece behind me. I did spend time not only adjusting and taping in place those flowers and putting wire in there so that they fall a certain way and relate to each other in a certain way. I'm also thinking about the overall shape that they make in space. And so then, I could look at that piece behind me, that way, and say, well, I could put something down in the ground beside that beside the vase. And I could make that an interesting thing. Like if I put a little sculpture of a figure or an animal or something down there, that would steal the thunder from those flowers. But everything has been constructed with that composition in mind. And so crowbarring in a new focal area, I think will always end up with confusion, because it all comes back to composition. If you compose with an intention, then I don't know that you can easily, without a complete repaint, I don't know that you can easily change the intention of your composition later on. I mean, I could certainly activate a different part of the painting, but I think it would always feel like, well, it's kind of weird that she's suddenly drawing attention to this part when, all of the movement of those angles and shapes are leading to something else.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
And the fact that you mentioned that you put wires in your flowers changes everything for me. And I love that idea, because I hate painting flowers because they're just in a vase and they're like this,
Oh,
right?
I know.
And then what you just said there, okay, now I'm gonna have to experiment with flowers, because I've always disliked them because of the strangeness that they just sit there, right?
They just sit there.
That's
And
fantastic.
those ones were painted. Those ones were painted from life. I love painting from life. In my studio, I've got skylights. And so the sun will track through. In the summertime, it's too low in the sky in the winter, but in the summer, it will track through quite quickly through the studio. And so the peonies were in bloom. I snagged them in a vase, stuck them on a little table low on the floor, and I just kept moving them every 10 minutes closer and closer to my easel as the light was moving closer and closer to my easel. And I kept backing up, following along with the flowers. And then I'd hit the wall, and it's like, okay, now we're done for the day. Hopefully it'll be good tomorrow. Come back in tomorrow and try to get a little more done. It's such a vigorous, fun thing to do. You feel like you're truly engaged, like 100% engaged, because not only is the light moving really fast, but the flowers are real, and so they're dying really fast. Yeah, I just love that. It's like, that is painting for me.
Yeah, for sure. That's one of the best stories I've ever heard. You don't often hear that, you're moving your whole still life over, moving your easel back to continue painting. I think that makes you a true painter, without a doubt.
It's a good time.
Yeah.
And this is how I entertain myself. Other people, I don't know what they do to get their jollies, but that just thrills me.
I'm just looking into this crazy lady's room, and she's shifting everything every 20 minutes, right? Yeah. Oh my gosh. Since we're talking about flowers, maybe I'm over analyzing things, but for me, it seems like your flowers are more detailed than, say, more of your figurative work. So I just want to share my screen here to show you what I mean. I mean, this still life has some flowers on it, a lot more figures and whatnot. But here, again, this picture of this woman by the pool, very loose, very organic, very lacking of details, but you still get the impact. Moving to the flowers, although painted the same way, I'm finding more details. And I guess I'm probably saying I'm overanalyzing it because, well, flowers are a little bit smaller and they have more nuances. Is that what you think I'm thinking?
It's also it's a scale thing. Like that first still life, that's a 30 by 30 or 36 by 36, something like that. So I'm filling a lot of space. The figure is an 8 by 10. And so when I'm filling out that big space, I'm really orchestrating a lot. Here it's just, the figure is centrally placed. She's the focal point. And that's a reasonably big, I think it's a 24 by 36 or something, that piece there. Those are wonderful because all of the layering of color is there. Like if you look at those, like they're wonderful to do. If you look at that, those flowers, you can see that I went back in. There's pink and there's green on top, and then there's purple on top of that. And I'm trying to capture the complexity of the colors that if you stare long enough, your brain will start to create these colors. And I'm trying to capture that. And a big painting like that gives me the space to do it. Whereas a small painting like that little figure does not. So it's very much that's an alla prima. That's a done in a day sort of statement, as opposed to a many sessions statement.
Yeah, I didn't even think about scale, but it makes total sense, right? Absolutely.
Yeah. It just gives me a lot more room to explore color. They're much more challenging. I struggle. Always composition is the hardest thing. And then, I get a nice composition, and then I'm putting color notes down. It's like, okay, we can move this color there, and we can move it there, but then we've got to change it up here. We've got to, it becomes this real kind of chess game. If I do this here, then what happens over there because of that? And so I spend a lot of time just, pondering. You make a mark here and you've changed the entire painting. There is no, I'll just do this part. And I don't understand. I've never been somebody who could just paint like, I'm doing this part today. And then tomorrow I'll oil up that bit and I'll do that part. And then I'll
Yeah.
do this part. It's like, but the whole thing has to progress together. And maybe it's because I'm so focused on color. Because if you make a change in color in one area, that color speaks to all the other colors near it, and they start looking a little different. And then the colors that are near them don't look the same way in relation to those intermediate, those
Yeah.
bridging colors. And so the whole thing changes. You introduce a little bit of color here and you've changed the whole painting.
Talking about larger paintings because of
Yeah.
scale, what's your process for moving up to the larger pieces? Do you do smaller studies and move up, or you just start on the large?
I don't find that they are relatable to each other. Sometimes
Oh,
I'll do a little,
interesting.
yeah, I'll do a little color study and think, oh yeah, I know where I'm going. But then when I've got all of that expanse, if I go from an 8x10 to a 30x40, that's when I start really going, well, I'm not just going to leave that torso beige, like I could do on an 8x10. I've got all this expanse and it just looks so flat and not representative of what a torso at that scale, if I saw it in life, would be like. At that scale, I could represent, the bounced color and the warms and the cools and all of this stuff. I could put that in there in some fashion. And so even the little color studies, they might be okay for composition to some extent. But again, you're filling a bigger space, and that expanse of blank space behind a figure is fine at 8x10, but looks just a little too empty at 30x40. So yeah, I got to say that for me, they're very different animals. I consider them different paintings completely. Like it's not a study it's just a study, and then I go, oh, that's kind of fun. Let's see what happens if I make that bigger, and then just dive into a whole different process to make that thing bigger.
Yeah, yeah. That. Yeah, my brain's taking it all in. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's exactly with the madness that I'm going through. I'll do 3 or 4 color studies,
Yes.
9x12s or whatever, right? And then proportionally, all of a sudden, I'm going to jump to this 30x40 or whatever it is. And sure, it translates, but you're right. That 1 or 2 inches of flat color in those small 9x12s, it all of a sudden becomes huge on the
Yes.
30x40, right? So
And
yeah.
then you start having to address it and make all these changes, and pretty soon you've wandered really far
Hmm.
from the color studies. But I think the color study just is a good process because it shows you if you're really interested enough in the subject to make it big. Because big paintings, for me anyway, are arduous things. If I feel like I don't want to tackle it having done an 8x10, I don't feel like I want to go back to it. That was really worth doing because I didn't have to spend hours and days on a 30x40-inch piece of Belgian linen going, oh, that was a mistake.
Yeah, no
I
doubt.
didn't like it.
Yeah, that's intimidating right there, right?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I can't break the habit. I just love linen. It's so beautiful and so expensive. In
Yes.
Canada, I
Oh,
buy it from the States and I look at the prices the Americans are paying and go, oh, lucky.
yeah, yeah. All right. So I want to talk about next about your composition. There's so much to say about it, but one thing I've noticed, and I'll just share my screen here. In your works, they're not necessarily contained within the confines of the canvas borders. So it gives us more of a feeling of being there instead of just looking at a Polaroid kind of feeling. I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it. How intentional is this compositional decision, or is it more ingrained into your process now that you've done it a lot?
I think it's always intentional. I'm always looking for, yeah, I guess you're right, that sense that there's a continuation. It's like an open composition as opposed to a closed in composition. And I often look at the painting after I've done it and I go, I should have given it a little more, because there is a gravity. You say you've got a vase of flowers. There's a beautiful still gravity if they're all contained within the rectangle, and there's air around them. And yet, when I go to paint them, maybe because they are filling my vision and my senses, I'm not noticing the air around them. It's like, yeah, that's there. But look at those flowers. And so I'm painting what I see. I'm painting the way I see. I'm
Mhm.
surprisingly obtuse about, or just single focused when I look at something. My sister and I go out sometimes when we're together, and she'll say, oh, did you notice her shoes? I was like, what? I didn't get past her nose. Like I was looking here. That's all I noticed.
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't notice if she had gray hairs or wrinkles or anything. I was so fixated on the things that interested me, her expression. And that's the way I look at, I think, most of the world. I get fairly, I get tunnel vision. And I think that's probably why my compositions are so border to border and beyond, is because that is, in fact, representative of my vision.
It's more or less who you are. It isn't
It
necessarily
is.
a conscious decision to say the vase is coming off here to make it feel like blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, you're right.
interesting.
It's not conscious. It's just natural for
Yeah,
me.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Because
I can see that.
I've got my viewfinder and I hold it in front of things, my still life, and I go, okay, if I crop here and if I crop there and if I pull way back and I've got all this air around it, I think, so what am I going to put in all that air? That doesn't interest me at all. I'm bored with that. I'll crop back in it. Oh, now I like
Yeah,
it.
yeah, absolutely. Now, this is interesting. When you go use your viewfinder and you start cropping and whatnot, are you looking for the relationships of shapes and how they're unequal, or are you just looking for something that is attractive to you?
Well, both. But I'm definitely always striving for asymmetry rather than
Mm,
symmetry. So even if the vase is centrally placed, which isn't my on a small piece, that the vase will often be centrally placed, but the flowers will have to have dramatic asymmetry to make it not feel so still.
yeah, like this piece.
Yeah, exactly. More weight on one side than another, and a sense of movement, the thrusting stems on the one side, the kind of cloud-like clumping on the other side. So I'm always looking for asymmetry rather than symmetry.
Hmm.
But you can see that on a piece like that, if I had moved the vase over asymmetrically, that would just be too much. There would be too much happening with that. So having some symmetry to balance all of that asymmetry is kind of nice.
Yeah, but look at all this air up here. What were you gonna do? Sorry.
What was I going to do with that air? But you'll notice I layered color there. So it's like,
Yes, that's
yes,
right.
it
Yeah.
absolutely is air. It's, that piece has a sense of atmosphere behind it. It's not just flat color.
Yes.
It is a sense of depth.
Yeah.
I'm striving for depth in my work. I'm striving for form. I'm very interested in the sense of volumes. I don't, I love Matisse, all his flat shapes and patterns, but I would rather paint like Sorolla, who,
Hmm.
has all these beautiful colors in it, but there's always a sense of the volume of the figure that he's painting. Yeah, I'm trying to do, I know I'm trying to do a lot when I paint, and that's what keeps me working so slowly and coming back to a painting is like, I haven't done it yet. I'm trying. I know what I'm trying to do, but I haven't done it yet.
Yeah. But with your pieces, obviously, mark making is huge for you.
Yes.
It almost seems like mark goes down, analyze it, mark goes down, you analyze it, mark goes down. So without a doubt, mark making is important for you. But do you just rely on the brush, or do you bring out the strange tools? Do you bring out the whisks? Do you bring out the palette knives, the squeegees, anything?
Well, I do use scrapers and yeah, I frequently use scraping implements. I don't use whisk things or stencils and go through
Hmm.
stencils or anything like that. Although they're cool, I just haven't really felt the urge yet. But moving paint, particularly where I feel like I've gotten fussy and I've gotten stiff, and you always know when a painting is hardening up on you when that sort of energy that it had at the beginning when the marks were broad and you hadn't worried about the perimeter of the figure or the flowers or anything. When it's just a beautiful interplay of colors laid down in a very broad way with a nice kind of a design, a nice movement, an intention, a sense of light and shadow. At that point, I'm just so happy with the piece. And then as I develop it further and go, okay, well, let's, make this more of a recognizable figure or flower or whatever, they start to harden and feel lifeless to
Hmm.
me. And that's when I will pull out something to break that. While it's wet, I'll just scrape off big passages or use something squeegee-esque. Squeegees tend to be a little on the soft side and a little too much for what I'm after. I'm going to show you.
Yeah,
I've
because they
got
make those harder silicone kind of
They
things, right?
do, but this is like fabulous. It's so skinny. It's a pottery rib. I have no idea what they're called, and I don't think I've got a brand name.
Okay, we're all going to run out and buy
They,
one now.
oh yeah, totally. They're expensive, but I've used this for ages, and it's really good. It's called Sherrill, Sherrr, ILL, I think, but my eyes are not up to the task in here at this
Yeah,
moment.
like a
It's
pottery kidney, I think there might be called or something. Or
possibly, yeah, yeah.
oh, that's so interesting. I've been on the hunt. I've been using squeegees for a while, and they're getting a little too soft on me. So that sounds pretty
Well,
fantastic.
this is very flexible, but it will actually take you right down to the canvas really easily. It will scrape
Yeah,
dramatically. So it's not just kind of like a squeegee, which is too soft. It's just grabbing the top layer and slurring it across. This, if you want it to, can scrape some crisp lines right down to the canvas, or it can pull off an entire passage down to the canvas. And it's so destructive if you use it aggressively, but it can be very sensitive as well. It can just kind
Hmm.
of smooth an area. So, gosh, I should own stock because I'm promoting the heck out of it. But
No doubt.
it's really, yeah. This is the guy. Use this guy.
Do you ever use it to apply paint those, or stems of flowers,
No,
or one
it
edge?
doesn't. Well, yeah, you could, but it doesn't hold much paint. It's such a narrow little
Gotcha.
thing that instead those silicone ones that you were talking about, the gray, they're in the art store, that has a wider edge to it, and I can pick up and make a stem or something with that for
Yeah,
sure.
gotcha. Okay.
Nice.
So I'm trying to decide what your favorite part of painting is, and it seems like the process is your favorite part, and every stage
Absolutely.
really is brings joy and excitement
Yeah.
to you, no matter if you're destroying an area to rebuild it. That's still exciting. I guess the whole everything is.
Yeah, the whole thing is just endlessly fascinating, and that's why I have slowed down as much as I have. Why I now do paintings that take days, months, years. Even I pull it off the shelf and go, I'm still not, I'm not sending you anywhere because I'm still not done with you. You're not dead. There's something there, but you're not worthy of leaving the studio to go to a gallery.
Yeah.
And so and then after a while, you start being less attached to it. All of that work that you've put in, all the hours and days, after a few months of not working on it, you think, oh yeah, it's fair game now. I don't really care about this piece. It's not going anywhere. So I might as well do something dramatic with it. You do something really dramatic. It's usually when I grab a very big brush and make a significant change somewhere. And then the conversation starts up again. Then suddenly this painting that just had nothing to say to me months ago, I've done something. It's like, oh, well, that leads to this. And then you're off again. You could just
Yeah,
keep
yeah, yeah.
going. And it's joyful. I just love the act of putting on paint and then pondering what that just did and then trying
Yeah.
something new with it. And
That's
yeah,
amazing. That's freedom right there.
yeah, it is.
That said, though, eventually they have to leave home. How do you know when your piece is done?
I let them sit around for quite a long time because I'm never certain. At first you think, oh, I'm a genius. This is fabulous. It's going in the world. And then a month later you go, oh, what was I thinking? That's terrible. So I know that that's always going to be my process, is that I'm never certain if I've done anything decent. So I let them sit for a month, 2 months, 6 months, whatever, then have a look. Sometimes, of course, somebody will contact you off of Instagram. They'll go, I want this piece. It's like, okay, you can have it once it's dry, and you send it right off. Those are the lucky moments. But for the most part, I leave them in the studio until I really feel like, it's the best I can do at this point in my development. I know I'm hoping I'm going to get better. I'm certainly going to change again with time. At this point, is this the very best thing that I can do? Does it say what I want it to say? Does it feel like I've kind of addressed every aspect of it, the color, the shape, the light? Have I addressed it all? And I don't feel there's anything else I can address. Like it would just be kind of embellishment rather than mandatory changing. And if I feel that way after a month or two, then I know it's probably okay.
Okay.
And then I'll offer it to one of my galleries.
Yeah. So I guess at any given time, you must have, I would assume, quite a few paintings in your
I
studio.
do. I've got lots of work. Yeah.
I guess this leads me to a question about what you mentioned earlier about memory. I mean, you have all of this work in your studio still that you can only see so much because I'm sure they're layered, but you still have memories of painting every single one of them in the process and things that you did to recreate certain feelings. I don't want to say feelings, but energy within the painting. How much
Mm.
does the memory of previous paintings play in new paintings?
That's a good question. It's I think every painting leads to the next painting because you do something in the one before and you go, oh, that was kind of fun. Is there another image I could then explore that more? One of the best things that I ever did was, and I should do it again. I always say I should do that again. I did a series of paintings all about a robe that my mother gave to me when she was alive, and it was a robe that I saw her wearing when I was a kid. And it's kind of a faux Japanese kimono-esque thing, polyester, cherry blossoms on a black background. And so I took a whole bunch of pictures of a model in that robe. I spent a day just taking pictures and video, and then grabbing screenshots of the video, stills of it, and taking some of the photographs, and finding about, I think I did 8 cherry blossom robe in a row, and I started all 8 on the same day. So they weren't big. They were, the biggest was probably 12/16. So they were 8 by 10 to 12/16. I started each one of them in a different way. Like this one starts with just a few gestural marks, and then put it away until it's dry, right on the back how I started, because otherwise I'm screwed if it's like, well, this one was started with liquid, but that one was started with, Gamsol, and I need to know what I did. So on the back, I would make a note of the medium and, the start. So this one started with a gesture, that one started with a color block in, this one started with a grisaille, every one of them had a different start. And of course, the subject was, the colors were related from one to the next. It was all a different pose and a different cropping, some, close-ups and some full body. And then I had 8 paintings sitting around at various stages of dryness. And I'd just go in the morning and go, who's dry? Okay, let's do something on you. And I'd make a few marks, and then I'd put it down. And so over the course of, I don't know, it was a month or month and a half, I finished those 8 paintings whenever anyone was dry and I had an idea for it. And I didn't try to develop them fast. I just said, I think I'll put some pink there, and then I'll put it down because I have no idea what else I'm going to do there. Just the pink, and then I'll move on. And so every painting was feeding into the next one, because as they became further, some of them started to progress, I could see what was working. I like the way that the cherry blossom patterning was done there. And so maybe that would be a good idea for this one. And so they started to feed on each other, but I tried to keep them all very different. And they all looked very different by the end. They were related but different. So
that's fascinating.
That was a great thing to do. I should do that again.
Yeah, are they on your website?
Yeah, they were a few years ago. So they might be in archived works. I'm not sure.
I'm gonna have to look for them. That sounds like an amazing thing to do, right? It's just the freedom of it.
Yes, it is very freeing. And again, all processed, because I wasn't saying I need 8 good pictures at the end of this. I was just saying I need to explore 8 different ways to start and then develop a painting. Everything I do in the studio is purely selfish. It is purely for my entertainment, my development. It's not for my bank account. It's just like, can I be a better painter before I die? Can I be the painter I want to be before I die? That's always my goal. And I've tried to become the other painter, the one who's more concerned about the bank account. And I can do it for a day or two. Then I feel really soulless, and I'm dragging into the house after a day in the studio. It's like, it was okay. I did 2 things.
Yeah.
It's not my temperament. I get anxious and not unhappy.
Yeah. Well, you're a painter, not an illustrator, right? So huge difference.
I'm not a production painter. I think there are 2 kinds of painters, and I'm just not the one who can turn out paintings really fast. Nice paintings. I'm not saying they're bad paintings. Some painters that I know, they do beautiful paintings and they work so fast, but I can't do that. I always feel like then I'm just running, and I'm not kind of stopping and smelling the roses and going, but what if we didn't finish this one today? What if we let this one go for another month and we did this to it and that to it? And it's like, am I the person who goes from A to B really fast on a road trip, or am I the one that goes and explores all the different avenues along the road trip, not really worried about the destination, but more like, look at that, look at the waterfall, let's go walk here.
Saying all this, though, obviously you've done a lot of things in terms of experimentation, process, change, alterations. Have you ever done anything that just surprised you?
Oh, I think all the time.
Oh, okay.
And that's probably because my memory is short. But I do something and I go, oh, that's fantastic. I know, like this warm against that cool. And then I'll be looking back through paintings that I did like a decade ago. Oh yeah, I knew that then. It's like, I think we just keep going in circles, and hopefully we are gathering, like the circle is bigger and there's more on it as we go. But I think I'm not just going like this, I'm just going around and around in bigger and bigger circles, relearning things, but hopefully relearning them with greater depth and
Mm.
understanding. It's not like the first time it happens and you put and something wonderful happens in a painting and you go, that's so cool. I'm going to keep using that. I must remember this. But it's not really, you're not ready to be applying that yet. It was just a
Mm.
happy accident. And then later on, you know so much more, and you come back to that moment and go, I understand how that worked, and I can even expand on it now because I know
Yeah.
more. And I think my whole life will be that. I will just keep relearning things, but hopefully in greater depth as I go.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
always a surprise because, you add a little more information each time and a little more confidence in it as well. And that changes the way your marks look. And so you've got this thing that is exciting and you know it a little bit more and your marks now look different. Then it's like a whole new painting. It's like
Yeah. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you're doing something
Absolutely.
completely
Yeah.
different than
Yeah.
you did 10 years ago the first time you encountered that surprise.
That's fantastic. So for everybody out there, I guess there is no end. It always just cycles
Yeah.
over and you learn a little bit more and you're more mature at it. You're more confident at it. Yeah.
I think so. I don't think we're ever done. If we're done, I feel like, well, what is the point now? If
Yeah.
if I've reached a peak, what's the point of hanging out on the peak? Like you climb the mountain not to get to the top of the mountain. You climb it to do the climb. The peak is like, yeah, but now we're going back down.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just keep climbing as far as I'm concerned. Just keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. That's great to hear, especially for someone who has so many paintings under their belt. You're keeping it fresh. You're keeping it fresh. You're keeping it exciting. So it's nice to hear we can continue without plateauing. I like that.
I think so. I think,
That's great.
our mindset is our greatest enemy in that way because your family will say, well, why are you taking more classes? Or don't you know how to paint? You
Yeah,
know?
yeah,
Or why are you changing that? That was so successful. That sold so well. So why are
mm,
you not doing that anymore? You get that sort of coming at you sometimes. And I always think that's beside the point of what I'm doing. I'm not making widgets. I am trying to say something visually that represents my whole psyche. I'm trying to put myself on that canvas. And, then it's more like, well, it's therapy. And look at people who spend 20 years in therapy and they don't say, well, I'm done. So I'm going to spend 20 years on a painting and nobody can tell me that it's done
no doubt, no
until I
doubt.
say.
Believe it or not, we've talked for an hour. This is amazing.
Well, it's been fun.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Now, I always ask this question of everybody, and the first one is, what's the best piece of advice you've been given?
Yeah, that's Alex Kanevsky in the workshop that I took. He said that you should make a mark the way that Elizabeth Taylor married her husbands, with total commitment and confidence. If you don't have that commitment, he says, don't make the mark.
Mm.
So we were painting from life in the studio. We had a model, and he said, if you ever find yourself going like this, going, I'm just going to fill in the background. He says, stop. You're not engaged, and nobody
Mm.
looking at that part of your painting will be engaged. He says it's better to leave it as blank canvas than to just mindlessly fill it up out of a sense of obligation. That really struck me as so important, and I've thought about that for years because it was a different way of thinking about making a painting. It's not like, fill every space and make sure you got a background and a middle
Mm.
ground and a foreground. He said, if you don't want to put in that background, then just, if you only are really enchanted by this quarter of the background, but you're starting to get bored as you move towards the halfway point, he says, stop. And if you want to leave it blank, that's okay. And it was the permission of that, the permission to, and again, it's expressing yourself. It's saying,
Mhm.
I got bored here, so I stopped, And that again is what I think a painting should do. It communicates who you are at the very moment of painting that. It says, I got bored. I can always see it. I do a lot of critiquing in my classes, and also, people can hire me to critique. So there's a plug. You can hire me through my website. You'll see it. But I can always tell when I look at the body of work that the painter has presented to me, I can see where they were fascinated by what they were
Mm.
doing. I can feel the energy, like the painter puts their interest so clearly into the paint. And I can see where they got bored or where they got confused, but they kind of fudged it, smudged a little together
Yeah.
here and did a little fancy stuff. And when I say that to them, I said, it looks like you loved this, but you were not that interested in that. They'll go, yeah, you're right. Like every time I have pointed out where they look like they have lost their focus, they have affirmed that that is where they lost their focus or
Interesting.
interest.
Yeah.
And so I think that was, that advice from Kanevsky was spot on, because we put our intentions, our interests, our passions onto the canvas, no matter what the subject is. It can be anything, but we're putting our interest on the canvas, and we've got to be aware that the viewer is picking that up as well.
That's a good way to think about it. Now I'm going to have to try that because, we're all guilty of it, 100%. And
Absolutely,
now
because
I
you
got to look at my
feel,
paintings in a different light now. Where was
yeah,
I
because you kind
bored?
of feel like the viewer is going to expect that you fill it up from
Well,
edge to edge,
yeah,
but you don't have to.
that's fantastic. Oh my God, no, you ruined me.
It's
Oh,
liberating. It's liberating,
well, no
Michael.
doubt too, right? Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, saying that, if
Yes.
we can keep it different, what is your top piece of advice that you give others?
My top piece of advice that I would give, that I always give other painters, is to cut themselves some slack and not be so hard on themselves. I find, the longer I do this, the more I am accepting of all the mistakes that I make on a daily basis. And I go, oh, well, that was worth trying, but it was a flop. And let's see if I can get past it, or if this one's truly dead, Mostly I can get past it, or I can at least turn it into something that is presentable. But I find that people who are not that experienced, they tend to put a lot of pressure on themselves for every single painting. Paint a lot, notice where you have done something that your eye goes, oh, I like that.
Mm.
And then even write a note saying, remember to do this. And the rest of the painting might be a flop, but this 2 inches right here is just doing it for you for some reason. Figure out why it's doing it for you. Is it the color interaction? Is it the strong contrast? Is it the way you did that edge, the layers, whatever it is? Figure out what it is that you like about that piece. Make a note. Keep that painting, even though the rest of it is a flop. Keep it, or cut out of the canvas that part that you really like, and post it somewhere on a bulletin board in your studio, and just celebrate that. And it will be something that you can look at and go, I'm going to try that on this painting of this subject. I'm going to,
Yeah.
this layering thing that I did there inadvertently, I'm going to try it with this subject. And you'll fail, because it's only the second time you've done it. But by the 20th time, the 30th time, you're starting to get a little bit going there. So paint a lot, be kind to yourself, celebrate the stuff that is working on a painting. It's very rare that an entire painting is pleasing you, but there will be moments, and celebrate them, notice them and celebrate them, and try to do more of them. And the other piece of advice is paint from life, because that trains your eyes. You can't train your eyes from a photograph. There's just not enough information. So much is missing. Like, all you can get from a photo is some basic shapes. And then they're distorted as well, depending on the type of lens that took that photo and the angle you were at and all this other stuff. Yeah. So paint from life. You will learn so much more. I always say this, you'll learn so much more painting an apple on a plate every day under different lighting conditions. Like, you'll learn more in a month than you do from a year of painting from a photograph.
Yeah,
So
that's great advice. So there you go. 2 for 1 right there.
2 for 1.
Thank you so much. If you're interested in finding out more about Ingrid, if you're new to her, you can find her at ingridchristensen.com. And if you're on Instagram, her handle is Ingrid Christensen Artist. And if you're interested in Artful Minds, check out artfulminds.ca. And Ingrid, thank you so much for letting me interview. It's been fantastic. Maybe there'll be another one down the road, because I still have so many questions to ask.
It's been a pleasure. Well, I do talk.
Well, it just opens up a whole new avenue for me, right? I mean, this is great. Thank you so much.
Delightful to hear. Thank you, Michael. It's been a pleasure.
All right. And thank you to everybody else. Take care. Have a good night. Cheers, everyone.
Bye.